All right, 132, folks. We're still looking at Unit 4, but we're looking at Chapter 22 at this point. There's a few things happening. We know who won the war. The Americans helped win the war. We're talking World War One. It's called the Great War at this point because there's only been one World War, so it's a Great War. Um, it involves most of the world. Yes, I don't know how great it was, but we helped win it. And as such, when we come home, we are celebrating. We're having a wild party. We're looking at what become the Roaring Twenties. Here's what you need to know: is we have this industrial machine that we cranked up to manufacture for the war, and creating for the war, we created some really neat stuff, and it turns out civilians can use that neat stuff. Turns out that we learned how to manufacture a whole bunch of stuff really fast, and we don't want to quit manufacturing. So what we're going to do is transition this mass production from a war culture into a consumer culture. We're going to go ahead and keep manufacturing and allow people to buy. But the problem is people only have so much money handy because they still got to eat and other stuff. So we introduced something called installment buying, buying on credit. This is huge, folks. This installment buying on credit allows people to buy things they can't normally afford to spend money on, stuff they would normally have to save up, whether it be a house, whether it be a car, whether it be, things along that line. But now they can go ahead and buy it on installments. They can buy it on credit, give you not a whole bunch at once, but a little bit at a time. It allows them to allocate money. The other thing that comes out of this is some advertising. One of the things that George Baruch does is he creates this information system, and this information system, this way of allocating, this way of investigating, this way of controlling what the consumer, what the people hear and see, that's created out of this wartime thing, becomes what we refer to as modern advertising. Um, it changes the culture. Something else that comes out of this is the radio, folks. We look at the introduction of Marconi in the radio. We look at the introduction of shortwave radio that was originally used for the war, but is going to be used and introduced into consumer culture because we have an excess of them. And so we're starting to look at the introduction of radio programs that they call soap operas. And they're called soap operas because they find out that they can put on these advertisements. People were listening to them. And it turns out that they're marketed sorry ladies, but they're marketed to ladies that are home more often in the middle of the afternoon. It turns out that they can have companies pay for advertising. Well, if you're going to market to people at home in the middle of the afternoon, that's going to be detergent, it's going to be cleaning, it's going to be, that's where soap operas come from. They're marketing to the women, and the idea is it's this mass culture of marketing, and so they're going to have these shows. What else is happening is we're looking at the introduction of actually talking movies, folks. Talking movies are kind of unique because before this, they were silent films. So they had music to go with them, and the talkies are going to change an awful lot of things, including who sees films, who doesn't see films, and whether or not the content of films is controlled by the government or whether it's controlled and policed by the people that make the film. Because we're going to start looking at a bit of a rating system because this mass culture of the introduction of going from silent films to talkie films is going to change things quite a bit. There's something in this particular point called the Kelly Act. I think the Kelly Act to me is kind of interesting. What we market, what we introduce, what we tax is part of our national agenda, both economic and political. The Kelly Act says, listen, we don't tax films because films actually, when we ship them out, they market democracy, and democracy is something the world needs, so we don't tax them for shipping them out. We look at a lot of changes. We look at, Charles Lindbergh. We look at Amelia Earhart. We look at the introduction of full-time flight for rather than just a small thing, but actually flying for a variety of things. We're looking at the introduction of the automobile. Not that it hasn't existed before, but we're looking at mass production. We're looking at Ford. Ford is going to create the Model T. He's going to create the car for the masses. He's going to create the assembly line, production line. He's going to train his people. He's going to pay them better because he's going to realize we can use this assembly line to go ahead and manufacture more cars. The more we manufacture, that means we can sell more, but we can also manufacture more at a better price point. He's going to market them to the people. The idea being is he makes America's car, and you can buy a Model T in any color you want as long as it's black, because what he does is creates one simple, basic, one color of car for everybody. What else is happening? Well, manufacturing is going to be one of those things that creates a common ground. Common ground is kind of unique because it creates excess money with this manufacturing, so people are going to need something to do. We're going to look at the introduction of baseball, because baseball becomes a great equalizer. We're going to look at the introduction of nightclubs, of the jazz age, of ragtime. We're going to look at the introduction of the idea that youth is the time to be enjoyed. We're going to look at some changes. What I think is unique is we're looking also at the introduction of the restriction on the sale of alcohol. We have the women's Christian temperance movement. Women still can't vote. Among the things they're looking for is they're looking for a right to vote, but they're also going to develop the anti-saloon league. They're going to look at the women's Christian temperance movement. They're going to look at creating and pushing prohibition. But since they can't actually vote yet, they're going to push for the men to go ahead and create prohibition. What this does is going to create amendments, and this amendment to the Constitution is going to eliminate the manufacture and sale of alcohol, transportation of alcohol. The idea is that if there's no legal alcohol, people quit drinking, they quit wasting their money, they become more religious, they become better families, they become better people, and as such do much better at what's happening. It doesn't work. What this prohibition does is create a whole new category of criminal. What else is happening at this point I think is unique is you're looking at the introduction of the new women. Women are going to decide, well, listen, if men can smoke and drink and dance and cuss and, yes, even have sex, why can't we? And so we're looking at a renaissance, not only of the Harlem Renaissance, as far as the birth of Harlem and the birth of a new surge of literature and music and stuff in Harlem and other neighborhoods, but we're also looking at a resurgence of women. Excuse me. One last thing before I let you go. One of the things that pops up in here is going to be the NAACP. We're going to be looking at a whole new viewpoint. I often hear about the Million Man March. I hear about the March on Washington. I hear about the modern civil rights movement. This is where there's a birth of civil rights at again, folks. It's huge in the fact that what will happen is the soldiers of color are going to come home and they're going to realize that in Europe they were soldiers. They were Americans, that they were more free, and suddenly when they come back here, once again, they're second-class citizens. So there's a lot of stuff going on, folks, and one of the original births of the modern civil rights movement is going to be right here. I'm going to leave you right here for now because I need to talk a little bit more about a couple other things, and there's not enough time to finish it in one fell swoop here. So I'll pick up part 2 in just a minute.